The easiest lie to believe is the one planted by someone wearing a badge. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Interstate 95 just outside Richmond, Virginia, where traffic rolled by in steady waves and flashing patrol lights painted streaks of blue across the shoulder. Officer Daniel Brooks adjusted his uniform with the calm confidence of a man who believed no one would ever question his version of the truth. For years, people had accepted his reports without hesitation, his testimony without doubt, and his authority without challenge. Today, he expected nothing to be different. A black luxury sedan eased onto the shoulder exactly where Brooks had intended it to. Behind the wheel sat Vanessa Carter, a composed black woman in her early 50s wearing a charcoal business suit, her hands resting quietly on the steering wheel as she waited for the officer to approach. She lowered the window with a polite smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Good afternoon, officer. Is there a problem?" she asked in a calm, measured voice. Brooks barely acknowledged the question. Instead, he studied her with the familiar look that had convinced countless people to surrender their confidence before he even spoke. "License and registration," he said flatly. Vanessa complied without argument, retrieving the documents slowly and carefully. Everything about her movements reflected patience rather than fear. She never raised her voice. She never challenged his authority. She simply waited. Brooks glanced at the license, then looked back at her as if searching for a reason to justify the suspicion already growing in his mind. Around them, passing drivers slowed slightly, curious about another routine traffic stop unfolding along the highway. Nothing about the scene seemed unusual. Nothing suggested that within minutes, lives would change forever. Brooks asked her to step out of the vehicle for what he called a routine inspection. Vanessa did exactly as instructed. She stood beside the sedan with remarkable composure while the warm Virginia breeze stirred loose strands of her hair. Her expression remained unreadable, almost as though she had expected every second of what was happening. Brooks circled the vehicle with deliberate confidence before opening the driver's door once more. Hidden from the view of passing motorists for only a brief moment, his hand disappeared beneath the edge of the driver's seat. When it emerged again, his face carried the satisfaction of a man who believed his plan had worked perfectly. Seconds later, he held up a small plastic package and announced loudly enough for nearby witnesses to hear. "Looks like we've found something you forgot to mention." A few pedestrians stopped on the sidewalk overlooking the highway embankment. Cell phones appeared almost instantly. Cameras pointed toward the unfolding encounter. Vanessa looked at the package, then back at Brooks. Her face revealed neither panic nor outrage. She simply studied him with quiet focus, as though memorizing every detail. Brooks interpreted her silence as defeat. "You're under investigation," he declared, convinced the words would end the story before it had truly begun. But Vanessa slowly drew a breath, lifted her eyes to meet his, and asked one question with remarkable calm. "Officer Brooks, are you absolutely certain you want to continue?" For the first time that afternoon, something almost imperceptible shifted in the air, though Brooks was far too certain of himself to notice it. Daniel Brooks allowed himself a small smile as the cameras continued recording from a distance. In his mind, the silence coming from Vanessa Carter was proof that she had accepted the situation. He had seen it before. The moment when confidence disappeared and uncertainty took its place. That was usually when people began explaining themselves, pleading for another chance, or arguing loudly enough to make things worse. Vanessa did none of those things. She stood beside her car with remarkable patience, her hands folded comfortably in front of her, as if she were waiting for a meeting rather than standing on the shoulder of a busy interstate. Brooks shook the small evidence bag once before placing it inside a sealed envelope. "This is being collected as evidence," he announced loudly, making sure every nearby phone captured his words. Several people whispered among themselves. One driver standing near the guardrail quietly said, "That does not look good." Another person continued streaming the encounter live, convinced they were witnessing an ordinary traffic stop that had suddenly become something much more serious. Brooks requested another patrol unit through his radio, speaking with complete confidence. Everything sounded routine. Every word fit neatly into the report he had already begun writing in his head. Vanessa watched him carefully without interrupting. Her expression never changed. The wind carried the distant sound of passing trucks while the afternoon sun slowly drifted lower across the Virginia sky. Time seemed almost frozen. Brooks looked up from his radio and noticed that she was still watching him. "Do you have something you want to say?" he asked. She answered quietly, "Only that every decision has consequences." Brooks laughed softly. "That sounds like something people say when they know they are in trouble." She tilted her head slightly, but offered no response. The silence unsettled him for only a brief second before his confidence returned. He convinced himself that calm people were simply better at hiding fear. He had no reason to believe otherwise. Moments later, another patrol vehicle arrived. The second officer stepped out, glanced at Brooks, then at Vanessa, waiting for an explanation. Brooks summarized the situation quickly, presenting everything as though the facts had already been settled. The assisting officer nodded politely, but continued looking at Vanessa with quiet curiosity. She remained composed, offering neither protest nor complaint. Instead, she slowly looked beyond the patrol cars toward the highway entrance. Brooks followed her gaze, but saw nothing unusual. Traffic continued moving. Families headed home. Delivery trucks rolled past. Business travelers hurried toward the airport. Everything appeared completely ordinary. Then, far in the distance, several black sport utility vehicles entered the interstate together, maintaining equal spacing as they approached. Brooks barely noticed them. His attention remained fixed on finishing what he believed would become another routine. Arrest. He removed a standard form from his cruiser and began filling in the required information, carefully writing each line with practiced efficiency. Vanessa glanced briefly at the approaching vehicles before returning her attention to Brooks. "Officer," she said with the same calm voice that had never once risen in anger, "there is still time to stop making this mistake." Brooks never looked up from the paperwork. "I already finished making my decision," he replied confidently. Without realizing it, he had also taken the first irreversible step toward the moment that would redefine his entire career. The approaching sport utility vehicles grew larger with every passing second, their glossy black paint reflecting the fading sunlight as they exited the interstate and moved steadily toward the scene. None of them displayed flashing emergency lights, yet every vehicle traveled with quiet precision, maintaining perfect distance from one another. Brooks noticed them only briefly before returning his attention to the paperwork in his hands. He believed the stop was finished. The report would be filed. The evidence would be logged. Another successful arrest would become another routine entry in his record. Vanessa Carter remained exactly where she was, her posture relaxed and her expression unchanged. She neither celebrated nor worried. She simply observed. The assisting officer shifted uneasily, glancing from the approaching convoy back to Brooks. "Do you know them?" he asked. Brooks shrugged without concern. "Probably somebody important heading into the city." The answer seemed to satisfy no one except Brooks himself. The vehicles slowed as they reached the shoulder, stopping several yards behind the patrol cars with remarkable coordination. Their engines fell silent almost simultaneously. For a brief moment, the only sounds came from passing traffic and the steady breeze moving across the highway. Even the people recording with their phones seemed to lower their voices, sensing that something unexpected was unfolding. Brooks looked up again, mildly irritated by the interruption. "Stay right there," he instructed Vanessa before walking several steps toward the arriving vehicles. The first door opened slowly. A man in a dark business suit stepped onto the pavement, followed by two more individuals dressed with the same understated professionalism. They carried themselves with quiet confidence rather than urgency. None of them appeared interested in the crowd. None acknowledged the cameras. Their attention remained fixed on the traffic stop itself. Brooks called out politely but firmly, "This is an active law enforcement scene. Please remain behind the patrol vehicles." The man leading the group paused, studying Brooks for a moment before offering a calm nod. "We understand, officer." His voice carried neither confrontation nor apology. It was measured, controlled, and strangely familiar to anyone accustomed to hearing people who rarely needed to raise their voices in order to be heard. Brooks interpreted the response as cooperation and turned back toward his cruiser. Behind him, the suited individuals exchanged brief glances but remained silent. Vanessa watched them arrive without the slightest hint of surprise. If anything, her shoulders relaxed ever so slightly, as though people she had been expecting had finally reached their destination. One of the bystanders whispered, Who are they? Another answered, I have no idea, but this suddenly feels different. Brooks ignored the comments completely. He closed his citation folder and prepared to continue the process exactly as he had planned. The evidence envelope rested securely on the hood of the patrol car. His report was nearly complete. His confidence remained untouched. Yet as he reached for the next document, the lead visitor quietly spoke a single sentence that caused the assisting officer to freeze where he stood. Before anything proceeds further, the man said evenly, we need to verify the chain of custody on every item collected during this stop. Brooks slowly looked up, annoyance replacing confidence for the first time that afternoon, unaware that the routine encounter he believed he controlled had already begun slipping beyond his reach. Brooks frowned as he straightened the stack of paperwork resting on the hood of his patrol car. Chain of custody has already been established, he replied with unmistakable confidence. This investigation is under my authority. The suited man offered a courteous smile that revealed nothing. That may be true for the traffic stop, he answered evenly. It is not necessarily true for everything connected to it. Brooks narrowed his eyes. The statement sounded unusual, but he refused to let uncertainty appear in front of the growing crowd. More people had gathered along the shoulder, their phones still raised, capturing every word. The assisting officer quietly stepped closer to Brooks and asked in a lower voice, should we call the captain? Brooks hesitated for only a moment before answering. There is no need. This will be finished in a few minutes. Vanessa Carter remained beside her vehicle with the same composed expression she had carried since the beginning. She glanced toward the suited visitors, exchanging a nearly imperceptible nod that lasted less than a second. Brooks noticed the movement but dismissed it as meaningless. In his experience, people often search for reassurance when they realize they had lost control of a situation. He believed that was exactly what he had witnessed. One of the suited individuals quietly opened a slim leather portfolio and reviewed several documents without saying a word. Another spoke softly into a communication device clipped beneath his jacket. None of them displayed urgency. Their calm professionalism contrasted sharply with the tension beginning to settle over the roadside. Even the bystanders seemed to sense that the encounter had shifted into unfamiliar territory. Brooks cleared his throat. Ma'am, he said firmly to Vanessa. Before we continue, do you have anything you wish to add to your statement? She looked directly at him, her voice steady and respectful. I have not given a statement, Officer Brooks. I have simply answered your questions. Brooks forced a brief smile. Then perhaps now is the time. Vanessa slowly shook her head. No, I believe the facts will speak for themselves soon enough. Her words lingered in the quiet air longer than Brooks expected. They did not sound defensive. They sounded certain. That certainty irritated him more than open disagreement ever could. He turned toward the assisting officer and instructed him to secure the evidence envelope inside the patrol vehicle. As the officer reached for it, the lead visitor calmly raised one hand. Please leave the envelope exactly where it is. Brooks immediately objected. On what authority? The man reached into the inside pocket of his jacket but did not immediately remove anything. Instead, he met Brooks's eyes with remarkable composure. Authority will become clear in just a moment. Before Brooks could respond, another unmarked sedan rolled onto the shoulder behind the black sport utility vehicles. A silver-haired man stepped out wearing a dark suit and carrying a thin briefcase. The assisting officer quietly recognized him first, his posture changing almost instantly. Brooks noticed the reaction. Do you know him? He asked. The officer swallowed before answering. I have only seen him once before during a federal briefing. Brooks looked back toward the newcomer as the man walked calmly across the pavement, stopping only a few feet from Vanessa. Without hesitation, he inclined his head respectfully toward her and said in a clear voice that every nearby camera captured, Good afternoon, Your Honor. We apologize for the delay. The words settled over the roadside with astonishing weight. Good afternoon, Your Honor. Every conversation stopped. Even the passing traffic seemed to fade into the background as dozens of eyes shifted from the silver-haired man to Vanessa Carter. Brooks stared at her, waiting for a smile or a correction that never came. Vanessa simply acknowledged the greeting with a courteous nod. Thank you for coming, she replied calmly. There was no surprise in her voice because nothing about this moment was unexpected to her. Brooks looked from Vanessa to the newcomers and back again, trying to understand what he had just heard. "Your Honor," he repeated, "there has to be some mistake." The silver-haired man opened his briefcase and carefully removed a leather credential wallet. He displayed it only long enough for Brooks and the assisting officer to read the identification. The assisting officer immediately straightened his posture. Brooks recognized the seal of the federal judiciary but struggled to process what it meant. The man closed the credential wallet and spoke with the same measured professionalism. "The Honorable Vanessa Carter serves as a United States District Judge." Brooks felt the confidence that had carried him through the afternoon begin to slip away. His first instinct was disbelief. If that is true, why did she never say anything? Vanessa answered before anyone else could. "Because the law is not supposed to depend on titles. Every person deserves to be treated fairly before anyone knows who they are." Her words were quiet, yet they carried more weight than anything spoken that day. Brooks searched for another explanation. "I was conducting a lawful investigation," he insisted. The silver-haired official nodded respectfully. "That determination will be made after every fact has been reviewed." Another member of the federal team stepped forward with a secure document case. He placed it on the hood of an unmarked vehicle and opened it carefully. Inside were neatly organized files, each marked with official seals and dated over several months. Brooks noticed his own name printed on one of the folders. His heartbeat quickened. The lead official continued speaking in an even tone. "This afternoon was not the beginning of an investigation. It was the continuation of one." Brooks looked at the folder again, convinced he had misunderstood what he was seeing. Vanessa remained silent, allowing the documents to tell the story. The official removed a single page and held it where Brooks could clearly read the heading. It referenced an ongoing federal inquiry into allegations involving evidence handling, procedural integrity, and repeated complaints connected to multiple traffic stops. Brooks recognized several case numbers immediately. They were incidents he believed had long been forgotten. The assisting officer slowly stepped backward, realizing the situation was far more serious than anyone at the scene had imagined. Around them, the bystanders continued recording, but the atmosphere had completely changed. Only minutes. Earlier they believed they were watching another ordinary roadside arrest. Now they were witnessing the first visible crack in something much larger. Brooks looked toward Vanessa one more time. She met his eyes without anger, without triumph, and without satisfaction. Her expression reflected only patience, as though she had spent months waiting for facts to arrive at precisely this moment. And now that they had, there was no longer any need for words to carry the weight that evidence was fully prepared to bear. No one spoke for several long seconds. The silence carried more weight than any argument could have. Daniel Brooks stared at the federal case file bearing his own name, reading it once, then again, hoping the letters would somehow rearrange themselves into something less personal. They did not. The silver-haired official carefully returned the document to the folder before looking directly at Brooks. "Officer, this inquiry has been conducted under lawful judicial authorization for several months. Every investigative step has followed established federal procedure." Brooks tried to recover his composure. "You are telling me I have been under investigation this entire time?" The official answered without hesitation. "Yes." Brooks looked toward Vanessa Carter, searching for frustration, satisfaction, or even anger. Instead, he found only the same calm expression she had worn since the traffic stop began. That unsettled him more than any accusation. "You knew," he said quietly. Vanessa nodded once. "I knew there was an investigation. I did not know what decisions you would make today. Those decisions belonged entirely to you." Her answer landed with uncomfortable precision. No one had instructed Brooks to stop her vehicle. No one had ordered him to conduct the search. Every action had been his own choice. The assisting officer slowly stepped away from the patrol car, suddenly aware that every piece of evidence, every report, and every recording might soon receive far greater scrutiny than anyone had anticipated. The lead federal official turned toward one of his colleagues. "Please begin documenting the condition and location of every item currently present." Another member of the team removed a camera and methodically photographed the patrol vehicle, the evidence envelope resting on the hood, and the surrounding scene. Each photograph was taken deliberately, without haste. Brooks watched the process unfold with growing unease. Nothing about the federal team's conduct appeared emotional or confrontational. It was disciplined, careful, and procedural. That professionalism made the situation feel even more serious. Vanessa quietly addressed Brooks once more. Earlier you asked why I did not identify myself. He looked at her without answering. Because justice cannot depend on whether someone recognizes a title, a position, or a face. If fairness exists only for people with authority, then it is not fairness at all. Several bystanders lowered their phones for a moment, absorbing the meaning of her words before raising them again. The atmosphere had changed completely. This was no longer a roadside encounter attracting curiosity. It had become a lesson unfolding in real time. The silver-haired official accepted a sealed evidence container from another investigator and compared its identification number with the written documentation already prepared inside the federal file. Every number matched the existing records they carried. Brooks noticed the coordination and realized the team had expected to verify evidence long before they arrived that afternoon. Nothing about their actions suggested improvisation. Everything reflected months of preparation. The official finally closed the folder and looked steadily at Brooks. "Officer, this roadside stop will now become part of the existing investigative record. Every statement, every action, every recording, and every item collected today will be reviewed alongside the evidence already obtained." Brooks slowly glanced toward the body camera attached to his uniform. For the first time that afternoon, he understood that the device he had always believed protected his version of events might instead become the witness that remembered every choice exactly as it happened. Daniel Brooks slowly reached toward the body camera attached to his uniform before stopping. Himself, every movement suddenly felt significant. Every decision carried consequences he had never considered only minutes earlier. The lead federal official noticed the hesitation and spoke calmly. "Please leave all equipment exactly as it is. Preservation of the record is important for everyone involved." Brooks lowered his hand without responding. For the first time in years, he no longer felt like the person directing the situation. Around him, members of the federal team continued their work with quiet precision. One investigator documented the position of every patrol vehicle. Another recorded the condition of the evidence envelope without opening it. A third carefully noted the names of every officer and every witness present. There was no confusion. There was no urgency. Only methodical attention to detail. Vanessa Carter remained where she had stood since the beginning of the stop, watching the process unfold with calm restraint. She did not interrupt. She did not celebrate. She simply allowed established procedures to continue. The silver-haired official turned another page inside the investigative file. "Officer Brooks, multiple sources of documentation are already associated with this inquiry." Brooks looked up cautiously. "What does that mean?" The official answered with measured clarity. "It means today's events will not be evaluated in isolation. They will be compared with existing records, including body camera footage, dispatch communications, digital timestamps, written reports, and independently obtained video." Brooks immediately glanced towards several bystanders still holding their phones. Only then did he realize how many different angles had captured the roadside encounter from beginning to end. The assisting officer quietly stepped farther away, understanding that his role was now limited to observing and cooperating. The federal investigator continued speaking. "Objective evidence allows facts to be verified without relying solely upon memory or opinion." Brooks remained silent. He remembered every confident statement he had made since initiating the traffic stop. At the time, each one had sounded unquestionable. Now they echoed differently inside his own mind. Another investigator approached, carrying a secure tablet. "We have confirmed that the patrol vehicle recording system remained active throughout the encounter," she reported. The lead official acknowledged the update with a nod before adding another note to the file. Vanessa finally spoke again, her voice steady and respectful. "The purpose of accountability is not to embarrass anyone. It is to protect public trust by allowing evidence to speak honestly." One of the bystanders quietly lowered his phone and whispered to another, "She has stayed calm through this entire thing." The reply came just as softly. "Maybe that is because she never needed to prove who she was." Brooks heard the exchange, but said nothing. His attention remained fixed on the growing collection of documented facts surrounding him. Every photograph, every recording, every written observation formed another piece of a picture he could no longer control. The federal official closed the investigative file once more and looked directly at Brooks. "From this point forward, Every remaining step will follow established legal procedure. Independent review exists to protect the rights of every person involved, including yours. The statement was neither threatening nor reassuring. It was simply factual. As the evening sun settled lower over the Virginia highway, the flashing patrol lights no longer appeared to symbolize unquestioned authority. Instead, they illuminated a roadside scene where careful documentation, patient professionalism, and verifiable evidence had quietly begun replacing assumption with accountability. The last rays of sunlight reflected across the highway as the federal team completed another series of careful observations. Nothing about the scene felt rushed anymore. Every action followed a deliberate sequence designed to preserve accuracy rather than emotion. Daniel Brooks remained beside his patrol vehicle, watching investigators move from one task to the next with the quiet confidence of professionals who relied upon documentation instead of assumptions. One investigator compared the timestamps from the patrol vehicle recording system with dispatch logs. Another carefully photographed the evidence envelope before placing it into a secure evidence container under documented supervision. Every transfer was witnessed. Every signature was recorded. Every step reinforced the same principle that Judge Vanessa Carter had quietly demonstrated throughout the afternoon. Facts become stronger when they can be independently verified. Brooks listened as the lead official reviewed the next stage of the process. Independent forensic examination will determine the handling history of all submitted evidence. Digital records will also be compared with dispatch communications and available recordings. Brooks lowered his eyes. Earlier that day, he had believed the roadside encounter would end with a routine report filed before the end of his shift. Instead, the report itself had become only one small piece of a much larger review. Vanessa stood nearby, watching without interruption. She had not requested special treatment. She had not argued with anyone. She had simply trusted that established legal procedures would eventually reveal what had actually occurred. One of the federal investigators approached a group of bystanders who had continued recording from the beginning of the stop. With courtesy and professionalism, the investigator explained that anyone willing to voluntarily preserve their recordings could assist in creating the most complete and accurate record possible. Several people immediately agreed. They understood that multiple perspectives often helped establish the clearest understanding of any public event. Brooks watched as additional documentation was logged into the growing investigative record. Every news source seemed to narrow the distance between assumption and certainty. The assisting officer quietly approached the lead federal official. "Is there anything further you need from me?" he asked. "Only your complete and accurate observations," the official replied. Independent recollection remains valuable when it is documented honestly. The officer nodded without hesitation. Around them, the atmosphere had become remarkably calm. The crowd was no longer focused on spectacle. Instead, many stood silently, recognizing they had witnessed something far different from an ordinary traffic stop. They had watched a reminder that accountability depended upon patience, evidence, and lawful process rather than public opinion. Vanessa finally looked toward Brooks again. Her voice remained steady, free from anger or satisfaction. Every public servant carries responsibility that extends beyond a single decision. Trust is built one choice at a time, and it can also be lost the same way. Brooks offered no reply. There was little left to say. The confidence that had once filled every sentence had been replaced by reflection. The lead federal official closed the final evidence container and confirmed that every documented item had been accounted for according to procedure. As the convoy prepared to leave the roadside, flashing patrol lights continued illuminating the evening sky, but they no longer represented unquestioned authority. They now illuminated something far more enduring, the quiet reality that when every fact is preserved, every voice is heard, and every action is measured against the same standard. The truth no longer depends upon who tells the story because the evidence is prepared to tell it for everyone. Several weeks later, the busy highway had long returned to its ordinary rhythm, but the events of that afternoon continued moving through the legal system exactly as they were designed to do. The roadside encounter had ended, yet the careful review of documented evidence had only begun. Every recording, every report, every timestamp, and every witness statement had been examined through the same objective standard. The process was deliberate because lasting justice depended upon patience rather than speed. Judge Vanessa Carter resumed her responsibilities with the same quiet professionalism that had defined every moment of the encounter. She never spoke publicly about the traffic stop. She never sought attention for what had happened. Colleagues who knew the full story understood why. The integrity of the legal system was strengthened not by personal victories, but by faithful adherence to lawful process. Daniel Brooks also faced a different kind of silence. The confidence that had once shaped every decision had been replaced by long moments of reflection. For the first time in his career, he fully understood that authority was never meant to stand above accountability. Every badge represented public trust, and trust could only survive when every action was measured against the same rules that protected every citizen. The federal investigation continued according to established procedures, supported not by assumptions or rumors, but by carefully preserved evidence. Multiple independent sources confirmed the sequence of events, demonstrating why transparency remained one of the strongest safeguards within the justice system. No single voice determined the outcome. The facts spoke together. The bystanders who had witnessed the encounter often remembered one detail above all others. They did not remember raised voices or flashing emergency lights. They remembered the remarkable calm of a woman who never demanded respect, never announced her position, and never attempted to use authority as a shield. She simply trusted that truth would eventually find its proper place. That memory stayed with many of them far longer than the traffic stop itself. Some later explained that the experience changed the way they thought about fairness. Real equality, they realized, begins long before anyone learns a person's title, profession, or influence. It begins with the very first conversation, the very first decision, and the very first moment one human being encounters another. Imagine standing there on that Virginia roadside, believing you were witnessing an ordinary traffic stop, only to discover that the most powerful person present never relied upon power at all. She relied upon character, patience, and confidence in the rule of law. Those qualities quietly transformed an ordinary afternoon into a lasting reminder of what justice is supposed to look like. Long after the patrol lights disappeared and the cameras stopped recording, one lesson continued echoing far beyond that stretch of highway. Uniforms deserve respect because of the responsibility they carry, not because they place anyone above the principles they are sworn to protect. Titles deserve respect because of the service they represent, not because they create different rules. In the end, the badge did not define the law, the courtroom did not create the truth, and the loudest voice did not decide what mattered most. The evidence did. Character did. Accountability did. Because the strongest form of justice is not the one that announces itself first. It is the one that quietly waits until every fact has been heard, every person has been treated with equal dignity, and the truth no longer needs anyone to defend it because it can finally stand on its own.